What's going on, everybody? Welcome into the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Thanks so much for joining me today. We are going to be going over the Packers' fourth round offensive lineman, Zach Tom, out of the University of Wake Forest. You guys know the drill by now. We'll be going over his positives, his negatives, some things he needs to work on, what he can bring to the table, and what he ultimately could become in Green Bay. Before we get there, this is the ultimate Packers offensive lineman pick. They very much have a type in the middle, fourth, fifth round of the draft that they love to take, and Zach Tom fits it to a T, right? Usually it's a player who played left tackle at college and is probably going to have to, either go to guard or center in the NFL, maybe a little bit undersized, but has really unique traits. In Zach Tom's case, he's an incredible athlete, tested through the roof athletically. And again, this is very much their type. Versatile, played left tackle, can probably play a couple different positions. And again, extremely athletic, only 23 years old. For anyone that follows Brian Gutekunst and the Packers draft closely, just about every one of those people had Zach Tom as a potential Green Bay Packer at some point on day 3 of the draft. It didn't take Brian Gutekunst long to strike. He picks up Zach Tom in the 4th round. And again, he is the epitome of a Packers offensive lineman at this point in the draft. He is a redshirt senior, again, offensive lineman. He played some left tackle, played some center, pitched in at right tackle every now and again, but mostly left tackle and center at Wake Forest. Again, out of the University of Wake Forest, ACC, just turned 23 in March, 6'4", 304 pounds. And we talked about Zach Tom being athletic and Brian Gutekunst liking these athletic offensive linemen, right? Unlike Romeo Doubs, who we talked about yesterday, who didn't test and we weren't able to go through some of the athletic thresholds and things like that. Well, Zach Tom at center basically broke the mold. So he's in the 84th percentile for height, 70th percentile for weight, only the 47th percentile for bench press. So that is the one that was, slightly below average, but 97th percentile 40-yard dash, 99th percentile 10-yard split, 96th percentile vert, 99th percentile broad jump, 92nd percentile short shuttle, 96th percentile 3-cone. He tested out as the 100th percentile center in MathBomb's RAS database, basically meaning he's the most athletic center that has ever come out. And again, it depends what position you want to plug him in at, but if you plug him in at center, he broke the mold. He is the most athletic center. And it's not like there's a couple of these, categories missing, right? It's not like he didn't bench press or like he didn't, do the 40-yard dash or like he missed out on one of the tests, right? He tested in everything. And again, he came out mathematically, again, using MathBomb's system as the number 1 overall athletic center in his entire database. So he broke the mold. So let's jump into Zach's positives. First of all, he was a 3-year starter at Wake Forest, again, with starts at left tackle and center. So it shows some of that versatility. And then we just went through it, right? There's athleticism and then there's rare athleticism. And when you have years and years and years of testing data and somebody tests as the best athlete ever at that position, that is a rare athlete. And that's exactly how Zach Tom tested. And again, I don't know what more that you want than the 100th percentile, top number 1 rated athlete score, again, compared to all of the other centers in the entire database. That seems like it would be advantageous and certainly something that Brian Gutekunst would be drawn to. And that was clearly the case. And this will not surprise you based on all the athletic testing that we just talked about. But Zach Tom is a very easy mover on tape. So he gets out of his stance very quickly. He can move laterally quickly. He can move up and down the field, the 40-yard dash or the 10-yard split more, appropriately. It shows up on tape. He can get to the second level very easily. He can pull very easily. Movement skills are no issue for Zach Tom whatsoever. Again, there's always the difference, right, between those players who test really athletic and then you put on the tape and you're like, are you sure? Did you lose a bunch of weight before the combine or your pro day and just, so you could test well, but it didn't really translate on the field? Zach Tom, it translated to the field. And, I don't know that anyone was necessarily expecting him to be the top, athletic center of all time. But still, you put on the tape and you can clearly see the movement skills that he possesses. And again, that matters, right? Matt LaFleur's system, the zone stretch, getting to the outside. We've seen seen David Bakhtiari and we've seen some of the guards pull, like they'll use movement. They want to get those guys to the second level. It's so important to get backside blocks in this Matt LaFleur offense. So all of it requires top end movement skills. And again, Zach Tom has that in spades. And I think the other thing I really like here is that he wins with technique, and specifically he uses both of his hands very well. Ben Fennell all the time will talk about independent hand usage, right? So if you're using two hands to punch at the same time and you miss, or the defensive lineman or the outside linebacker swipes your hands down, now both of your hands are gone, right? And then that defender can, use that against you to get around you, get to the quarterback, etc. So independent hand usage means like your hands are independent of one another, so that if one hand goes down, you still have the other one to hopefully control the defender. And that can be very advantageous. And again, Zach Tom does that very, very well. And again, you just see him win with technique. He gets his hands inside. His hands are very quick. We'll get to some of the deficiencies in that area in just a moment, but overall, you see him win with technique more often than not. He's not he's not the biggest, most physically imposing player in the world, especially as a left tackle in the ACC, but he gets the job done with his technique. And again, you would think that moving inside, especially at a center position, that would potentially behoove him even more to be able to use that athleticism to his advantage. And the technique to his advantage as well. I would also say that he is very boring to watch in all the best ways. So think of it this way, right? As an offensive lineman, you don't ever want to think about those guys, right? If you're a fan watching the game, whether it's your left tackle, your center, it doesn't matter, right? You don't want to hear David Bakhtiari or Elton Jenkins or Josh Myers or who's ever out there playing. You don't want to hear their name. You want to hear Aaron Rodgers. You want to hear Alan Lazard. You want to hear Aaron Jones and AJ Dillon, all the playmakers, because usually if you hear the offensive lineman's name, it's because there was a holding penalty or a false start or they got beat clean, et cetera, et cetera. So when you're watching an offensive lineman, it's a good thing to be bored. And I was very bored watching Zach Tom again in all the best ways possible. I'm not saying he's not fun to watch, because again, with the athleticism and his technique, you can fall in love with that type of player very, very quick and appreciate some of the stuff that he's putting on tape. But it's very it's just like you're like in, Westworld, and everything's just going over and over and over, and you're in your loop doing the same exact thing, right? So that's what it felt like watching Zach Tom. It was, Groundhog's Day. You put the play on, and it's like you knew what was going to happen before it even happened, because you watched it over and over and over and over again. He has a very repeatable process. Like, defenders can't figure out a way to get past him. And again, he makes it look very easy. And as somebody who, you want to maybe see some variance or some difference and take some notes on it, it became very boring at times. And again, I mean that in all the best ways possible. The other thing that I really want to point out here with Zach Tom is that he has phenomenal vision with picking up blitzes, picking up twists, picking up stunts. Nothing is surprising him. You cannot get past him. Like, even when you're doing a delayed blitz or somebody's coming around late on a twist or a stunt, he is keenly aware of everything that's going on in front of him, which again, if you are thinking about potentially moving him to a center position, that awareness, the peripheral vision, the ability to keep your head on a swivel and know everything that's going on is incredibly important. And again, he very much shows that on tape, especially, it's one thing to do it at left tackle, right? But I think that's going to play very well at center. And again, just no defense was getting anything by him. And we might as well talk about right now his intelligence as well. I think I had it a little bit later here, but incredibly smart player. So he plays smart, but also, he's a very smart player off the field as well. 3-year all ACC academic team, graduated cum laude, top student athlete in the ACC, which he won an award for. Just a very smart person off and on the field. And again, it's one thing to be book smart. That doesn't always translate on the field. With Zach Tom, it very much translates on the field. You can see his awareness. You can see his IQ. He's got great football intelligence, so that the quickness and the smarts and all of it translates onto the field. And again, I think it would make him a very good center because of that. Never panics. You don't really see him ever get, outside of, really anxious or outside of his normal stance or process. He's just a very calm player. And that's where I go back to it's just almost boring to watch at times because, it's the same thing over and over. And again, you don't see him get out of himself. You don't see him try to do too much. It's just the same repeatable process over and over, never panicking, never getting anxious, rarely holding. We'll touch base on that more in just a moment. But again, I love his demeanor from that standpoint of never panicking and just playing within himself throughout the course of a game. He also mirrors incredibly well. And that goes back to that lateral movement skills, right? But like, it's one thing, again, to have those lateral movement skills. It's another to actually be able to mirror defenders on the field. They go left, they go to their right, you go left, they go left, you go right, etc. Like, again, no matter what they're doing, like they can spin move, they can twist, they can stunt, they can go speed rush, they can go, it just doesn't matter. He's going to stay between, his defender and the quarterback, or the defender and the running back, whoever he's trying to protect, and you're just not getting around him, and he's going to mirror whatever you do. And again, those movement skills show off on tape, and again, it translates onto the field. He's able to get underneath pads and win with leverage, right? He is not a power player, and we'll discuss that more in just a second, but that 24 bench reps, 47th percentile, not bad, right? But like, he's not a mauler. He's not a physical player. He's not just going to drive somebody, 10, 15 yards down the field, but he's able to get under their pads, use leverage, and win the battle, even though he's not that mauling type of player, right? And then again, that fits very well within Matt LaFleur's system and what Green Bay's trying to do along their offensive line. The other thing I would say is that he anchors surprisingly well for his size. And let's just jump into this right now, right? So we just talked about he's 6'4", 304. So 84th percentile for height at center, 70th percentile for weight at center. And you might be thinking like, Andy, that doesn't sound like a small player. That's a good size center. And you're not wrong, but you watch him in person, and even you watch him on tape, right? And he just feels smaller. And I don't know if, again, he put on a little bit of weight when he, did the combine, but like when you watch him, it looks like he's playing at like 6'3", 280. Like that's the type of player that he is. And again, that shows off his movement skills, but overall, again, and especially as I saw him in person at minicamp, like you're wondering, like he almost at times looks like he is a JV player that's like just trying to get up to the varsity level, right? It looks like he needs some time to grow. And we'll get more on that in the negatives in just a second. But while he is 6'4", 304, and those numbers are good, you watch him and he has a very slender body type. So as you're looking at somebody who you want to play on the interior, usually want a little bit of a thicker lower half, somebody that's going to be able to anchor very well. And Tom doesn't necessarily have that. He's got more of a slender frame, especially on the bottom half. And again, it looks like somebody who's going to need to put on some weight, some functional strength and weight in the weight room, and is probably going to be a little bit more ready in year 2 and year 3 as somebody who potentially could play on the inside, either at guard or center down the line. But he may need that year of weight room and adding some functional strength to his body. But when I say that he's a smaller player, with that being said, and where I was going with my positive here is that he anchors so much better than you would expect him to with that thinner lower half. And like, I was always very surprised. Like I kept waiting for somebody just to bull rush him. And even when players tried to, he anchored much, much better than I ever would have expected him to. Not that dissimilar. And again, I'm not comparing him to David Bakhtiari here, but like, it's not too dissimilar to Bakhtiari, who struggles anchoring, but like he does it well enough that he always stays in between Aaron Rodgers and the person who's trying to bull rush him, right? He will get pushed back from time to time, but he stays in between the two and gives his quarterback or running back a puncher's chance and makes sure that there's not a clean pathway to the quarterback or running back. So he anchored much better than I expected him to, again, based on his size and based on his strength, and just, again, his overall, slimmer lower half, I guess I would say. But again, if you're anchoring well, who the heck cares if it's a little bit smaller than maybe you were expecting? He at times it almost feels like he's absorbing contact. So again, I'm watching him against Jermaine Johnson at Florida State and a couple of these other players who are trying to power rush him and get into his body, and they'll use heavy hands and violent hands, and it's just like it's like he's absorbing it. It's like it's not even phasing him. And again, you're looking at this player who you're maybe expecting to be able to be pushed around a little bit more, and they're using violent hands into his chest, or they're getting into him using a long arm, trying to bull rush him, and it's just like it doesn't even phase him. And again, that just goes back to his demeanor. Like, he's very repeatable. He's doing the same thing over and over. And even when you have these bigger, more physical players who are trying to bully him around a bit, he's like, nah, whatever. Like, I'm good. Like, you're not gonna push me back. I'm gonna anchor if I need to. And again, it's just like he's almost absorbing that contact from time to time. I also think he plays with very good effort. He looks for work. There's one play on tape where like he's pinballing between three different guys, and like he could have just stopped at one, but then he goes to the second guy, then he goes to the third guy. Like, he's just getting to the second level and looking for more people to block. If he doesn't have somebody, he's going to find somebody. I don't see him as a grabber. He had a couple holding penalties this past season, but when I watched him, I did not see him as, again, somebody who panicked and started to grab people. He also just keeps battling, right? So again, I talk about, on numerous occasions, with a couple of these prospects that we've broken down, is you want to see them be able to win even when things aren't perfect. And Zach Tom shows the ability to do that when things aren't 100% perfect and things don't go his way, he still finds a way to battle through that and win the rep, even if the technique wasn't perfect, even if the other player was bigger, stronger, faster, whatever. He's just going to battle and keep doing it until he wins that rep. And more often than not, he wins rep after rep after rep after rep. And then last thing I'll say here is, from a positive standpoint, is he did perform very well against Jermaine Johnson, Jets first round pick. That's what you want to see, right? You want to see him go against some of the top tier talent and hold his own. And he's playing left tackle, a position he's almost assuredly not going to play in the NFL, against an edge rusher who went in the first round out of Florida State, goes to the Jets. And those two battled, and Zach Tom got the better of Jermaine Johnson on that day. So that's exactly what you want to see out of a prospect like this, even playing out of position, even going against a player who's going to have some, a little bit more strength and physicality maybe than a Zach Tom. It didn't matter. He won with technique. He won with quickness. And again, Tom won that battle against one of the top edge rushers in the ACC in Jermaine Johnson. And again, a first-round pick by the Jets. All right, negatives. As I mentioned, he's a little bit on the smaller side. When I looked at him next to his peers at rookie minicamp, even though it's just rookie minicamp, those players looked bigger than he was. So it wasn't too dissimilar to me to when Jake Hansen came into camp and rookie minicamp, and it felt like he was going to need a couple seasons to put on some functional strength. I felt that same way with Zach Tom. Now, based on how he plays, I'm not betting against him. He just, showed over and over and over in the ACC, even playing out of position, even against bigger players, that he was going to be able to hold his own, and his size didn't matter. So I'm not betting against him, but you would like to maybe see him put on a little bit more functional strength. I also wonder if he really does have positional versatility. I ultimately grade him out as a center. I think he has the potential to be a really good center in this league. And I wouldn't necessarily move him around too much. Maybe you could move him to guard. Maybe he could play tackle in a pinch. But to me, he really profiles well as a center in this Matt LaFleur offense. If it got to the point where Zach Tom was really, really good and you wanted to start him, I would feel better about moving a Josh Myers or even a Jake Hansen, to guard if you needed to, and move those guys around to change your depth chart around and keep Tom at center rather than put Tom at guard. I just think Tom seems a little bit more center oriented, where I feel like Myers and maybe even Hansen could have a bit more value as a guard. I think Myers is just a little bit bigger and would play that position better. Again, if you're breaking down the two, and again, both end up really good, I would rather have Tom at center, Myers at guard, than Myers at center and Tom at guard. So while I think he did show some versatility, I'm not sure he actually has a ton of versatility in the NFL. And if it were me, I would probably profile him and grade him and play him as a center in the NFL. I do wonder how he will hold up on the interior against power players. I'm thinking like a prime Akeem Hicks, right? So I know Akeem Hicks is no longer in his prime and he's not on a team right now, but that type of player I could see giving Zach Tom a lot of issue. I didn't see anything on tape that would specifically say like he's going to struggle with this, but it would be a question that I have projecting against these big physical mauling interior defensive players. Can he hold up at the point of attack against a player like that? he's not a physical player, right? He doesn't have a violent punch. He doesn't have a nasty demeanor. He's not a mauler. He's not a mover. He's not going to bull rush you or, I guess power block you 10, 15 yards down the field. But he's a good player. So I'm not concerned about any of that. But for teams that are looking for a power player or maybe, less of a zone blocking scheme, he probably would not have been a fit. But again, he fits within this Green Bay offense very well within Matt LaFleur's zone blocking scheme, stretch zone, outside zone, etc. So I don't have a ton of concern there. But again, if you're looking for somebody who's going to have that type of physicality and demeanor, Tom doesn't really have that, but he wins. So it's not that huge of a deal. You will see him you will see him fall off of blocks from time to time. So that's something that he has to do a better job of, is just maintaining those blocks, not falling off and not allowing the defender to disengage and try to go make a play. Overall, I really like his balance. So it's not something that I'm super concerned over. And while he did only have 2 penalties in his first 3 seasons, combined, he had 8 penalties this last year, including a few holding calls. So it was rare that he had penalties overall through the course of his 3 seasons, but did have 8 this past year in 2021. Overall, I project him as a center in the NFL. I know they have Josh Myers. I know they have Jake Hansen. I know they have a couple other players there, but I think ultimately that's where he could find his home. And maybe you could argue, all right, are you really going to spend a 4th round pick on a center after you just spent a 2nd round pick on a center a season ago? But we know Matt LaFleur is going to play his best 5 players. And I don't think it's impossible for, again, whether it's Myers or Hansen or some of those other guys to play guard. And Tom maybe even could play some guard in a pinch as well. I just think center is clearly his best position. The player that he reminded me a ton of was Cody Whitehair coming out of Kansas State. Loved Whitehair coming out. I thought I really wanted Green Bay to take him instead of Jason Spriggs. Ironically enough, the rumor is that the Packers moved up in the draft because they thought the Bears were going to take Spriggs. So they moved up in the draft and select Spriggs. The Bears stay put and get Cody Whitehair, who's still playing at a high level and is, one of their actual good veterans on their team. He's not like he's a Pro Bowler or anything like that, but he's a good, solid offensive lineman who's played center and guard, could play some tackle in a pinch. Yeah, I see Zach Tom very much in that same realm. I think he could become a Cody Whitehair in this Matt LaFleur offense. So that's pretty lofty praise for a 4th round pick. Whitehair was a 2nd rounder and again has had a really nice NFL career, but I don't think it's impossible for him to become that type of player and be a really nice center long-term for Green Bay who fits within the scheme. And again, after a few years in the weight room, you could really become a long-term starter for the Packers on the interior of the offensive line. That does it for my Zach Tom breakdown. Like the pick, makes a ton of sense. It's exactly what Green Bay looks for in their offensive lineman at this point in the draft. And if they found a Cody Whitehair in round 4 that could play some guard, play some center, great technique, highly athletic, heck, why the heck not at that point in the 4th round? Really like this pick. Think Brian Gutekunst's found something here, but we'll probably have to navigate having a couple centers already on the depth chart potentially ahead of him and needing to put on some functional strength. Thanks so much for joining me. Always appreciate it. I'll be right back here tomorrow with an all-new episode. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.